Did you notice what happened when I asked you that question and nobody responded? I mean, first the pressure was on you, but then all of a sudden what happened? It came back up here, and I interrupted him in doing it because I was getting uptight. So you have the opportunity of silence, and you also have the opportunity of not answering that question, with or without an explanation. Although usually, as a manager, in most situations that you're involved in, you want to tell them why you're not answering it. I don't know the answer. Maybe we can find it out. It's confidential information. I think it's an unfair question, whatever the reason might be. But you have all those options in handling the question situation. And the creative manager, again with that open mind, says, I don't necessarily need to answer every question. Sometimes there are better alternatives under the circumstance. Now, in those difficult conflict and problem situations that you face as a manager, you're sometimes going to reach an impasse. And you say, man, I don't know where to go from here. I mean, it just seems like there's no place to go. Let me suggest that there are places to go. Let's consider a couple of them. The first one, whenever an impasse is reached, it's like a train who's stopped. It's very difficult to get that train moving again, isn't it? But once the movement begins, you've got the momentum. And so I would suggest that in this process you consider building momentum. Let's talk about a number of ways that you can do that in the conflict situation. One way is to recap or to summarize. In other words, you can go back on the progress you've made here. Another thing that you could do is to introduce another issue. Perhaps you've stalled on the issue that you're on. Introduce another issue. And what kind of an issue would you want to select? One that you could solve relatively quickly to what? To build that momentum. Momentum is so important when you're in a conflict or a problem situation. Another thing you could do to build momentum is get agreement in principle. Maybe you can't agree on that which you're discussing now. Maybe there's conflict there, but can you get agreement on anything? I mean, I might simply say, Carol, you know, we've had a lot of problems over the years, but we've always been able to work things out, haven't we? Now, that's an agreement in principle, and we are both saying yes, and we are building our momentum. Or I might say, you know, this thing is so important that if we can't agree, why don't we find a mutually disinterested third party and help them decide for us in the situation? That's another agreement in principle. Another thing you can do is appeal to an ally. Who do you know that might come into this situation and be able to help bring it to an effective conclusion? Another thing that you can do when you reach an impasse and you want to build momentum is provide a conditional concession. What could you concede to resolve the conflict situation and get something from the other party in return that would help build that momentum and move you along? Another thing you could do is change the people involved in the discussion. Maybe pulling yourself out of it and bringing somebody else in might help greatly. A new perspective opens up different possibilities. A third thing that you can do when you reach an impasse is to express feelings. It's amazing what happens when you allow people to express their feelings. And many times your expressing your feelings may help. We may be in a very difficult situation, and I just say, boy, it's frustrating, isn't it? And you kind of relax and say, yeah, it is. I worked with a professor many, many years ago who traveled the world working with organizations and groups, and he had one simple philosophy. He said, if you want to think clearly, you need to recognize and express your feelings. We need to remember that as managers. Express your feelings and encourage those that are reporting to you, particularly in that conflict situation, to express their feelings. It might be through using empathy. That's a very effective technique. Or you might even use humor in the situation. That can help. There's a fourth thing you can do. When there's a conflict situation, so many times it's effective to reduce it to writing, to illustrate it. Get a piece of paper, maybe a flip chart, and put everything down in writing. You can see where you stand. You can identify the problems. You see, as a manager, we need to realize that writing crystallizes thought, and crystallized thought motivates action. And in this case, it will probably be positive action that will take us to a conclusion of that particular problem. There's a fifth thing that you can do. You can provide a guarantee. Because many times when there's a conflict, when there's a disagreement, when there's a problem, it's because one side is looking at the situation and perceiving it differently, perhaps with a lot greater risk than the other side. In that situation, providing some type of a guarantee under the circumstances can resolve that situation. Another simple way to do it, number 6, is to use a mediator or an arbitrator to mutually agree that we'll use some disinterested third party who could make an effective evaluation and help us be fair in resolving that conflict. Because then it's not me deciding or you deciding, but it's somebody we mutually agreed upon. When you want that win-win environment, I'd much rather do it that way than doing anything else to make sure that it worked out my way, because that's win-win in the situation. There's a 7th option that you have, and that's adding an option when you reach an impasse. Let me illustrate this point with this story. An athletic team that I'm familiar with was negotiating with one of their top players, his agent, and they were $100,000 apart in their negotiations for a 3-year contract. The team was offering $500,000. The player's agent wanted $600,000 per year on the 3-year contract. I thought the team did an interesting thing. They, first of all, asked a question. Why is this player worth $600,000? And then they shut up and listened. The player's agent said he's worth $600,000 because of the time he'll play this year and next year and the year after. And the team thought, and they said, you know, you're right. If he does play that much, he's worth that. So they added an option to the contract, giving him a base salary of $500,000 and adding a bonus that would enable him to get to $600,000 if he played that amount of time. It was a true win-win solution to the problem. We as managers need to remember to have an open mind as we approach every conflict situation. I hope you'll remember as you leave here today about the kindergarten class and the high school class. And quite frankly, I hope you'll have the attitude as a manager, the creative attitude of those kindergarten kids who came up with many different creative ways to solve the problem.